that I was at TDC happened to be when we went down to Austin. So I got to spend a lot of time with Danny there, and so I know. And he introduced me to the CFD community, so I'm indebted to him for that. In his role as in the Obama campaign, Danny is a member of the Technology and Media and Telecom subgroup, they call it, or working group, committee, something like that. And he's also the director of Decentralized Information, very cool title, at MIT, and he's a professor there as well. Yeah.
What I want to do is just talk very quickly about the main areas covered in the Obama Technology Strategy White Paper. I commend this document to you. You can find it around on the web. You can find it on the BarackObama.com website. And it's really a comprehensive strategy document for how to take advantage of the internet and other information technology, not so much for its own sake, which is sometimes I think the way we tend to look at it, focus on what the internet, the web, and other IT technologies can really do for basic needs of our society. The questions that this document starts off by asking are, how can we make sure that the internet does the best possible job serving politics, serving culture, encouraging economic growth, encouraging innovation, and how can we make sure that the internet continues to function in a way that it can help us to address issues such as climate change, problems of healthcare cost, and others. So though there's quite a lot of detail, there's quite a lot of policy detail in this document. I have to say, when I kind of went back and looked at it again in order to prepare for this talk, I was struck in a way that it wasn't quite as geeky as a lot of the initial briefing papers that went into creating this. The Obama campaign reached out very early on to a wide variety of people in the tech policy and the technology community all around the country. There are many people in this room who contributed to this document, people who've been in CFP, members of the Yale ISP mafia, as Jack Bogan explained to me I should refer to all of you. So it's been a really interesting process putting this document together. Let me just highlight some of the areas that it mentions, and I think we'll be able to get to the details. The Obama campaign started with an approach that I think many of you will know as a kind of an eat-your-own dog food approach. So if you look at especially the early days of the Obama primary campaign, it was not he was not the leading candidate. He didn't have a lot of money. Many of the traditional supporters and kind of party apparatus were involved in other campaigns, and he had to take a decidedly grassroots approach to getting his campaign going. And what we found was that using a variety of online platforms, blogs, social networks, etc., really proved to be a tremendously valuable organizing tool, not unlike the way that the Dean campaign got started 4 years ago. And I think that that's really shaped in a lot of ways this particular technology policy approach, and it's brought people into the campaign who have a kind of an innate understanding for an appreciation of the internet. So I think it's in some part for that reason that the first concrete policy issue that this white paper addresses is the issue that we all know as net neutrality. The Obama campaign has been a clear supporter of net neutrality approaches. We can talk more about the details of that, but he regards that as a fundamental. But say is not exactly convinced that the simple operation of market forces and antitrust law alone are necessarily going to ensure that we have the kind of open internet that we need. Along the same lines, Senator Obama has been a supporter of diversity in media ownership, mass media ownership. This Federal Communications Commission has taken a lot of steps really in the direction of increased media concentration. That's had a number of, I think, negative effects on the overall diversity of information in the mass media market. And as President Senator Obama would look to reverse some of those trends. This document talks quite extensively about the need to preserve freedom of expression on the internet while at the same time protecting children from harmful material and from people who would harm them. The emphasis here is decidedly against the censorship approach that has characterized some other views of this question. The goal is to put into the hands of parents tools that can help them keep content away from their children that they think are not appropriate, and also to work with law enforcement to make sure that people who are actually victimizing children, people who are engaging in criminal behavior are caught. The emphasis is on those measures rather than censorship. Senator Obama has taken strong positions on both consumer privacy and on privacy as against government surveillance. I will say that I've worked on some of these parts of this document myself, so I want to be careful how I characterize them, because I will say that the process of writing briefing papers that went to the campaign and then seeing what came out at the other end was sometimes frustrating as an author, but I actually think speaks to the fact that there's a campaign there that reached out quite a bit to get advice, good and bad, and then actually looked at it carefully and put it together into a platform. So on government surveillance questions, which I hope we'll talk about more, Senator Obama's been very critical of the what he regards as the abuses, for example, of the national security letter process over the last number of years. He supported strengthening privacy protections in national security surveillance matters. Some of those have made it into legislation that has passed the Congress, and some have not. But he's taken a very strong stand on those views and has said very clearly that he would demand more, he would require more accountability in the government surveillance process. On consumer, what's our time here? Okay. On consumer privacy matters, this document and the campaign recognize that we're obviously living in an environment where there's more and more personal information available. People put quite a bit of personal information up on the web. And for that reason, in addition to the traditional privacy protections and the traditional privacy laws that we have, Senator Obama is committed to enacting new privacy protections that focus on making sure that personal information, wherever it comes from, however it was obtained, is not misused. We need clear rules governing how information can and cannot be used. The genetic privacy bill that's recently passed both houses of Congress and was signed or not signed, I think it was signed, waiting to be signed, is an example of this kind of rule that recognizes that there will be a flow of genetic information for many beneficial purposes, but that we have to guard against discrimination based on that information. Very quickly, there are very strong positions in this document on making sure that government information is open to citizens, that we really use the technology that we have to make sure that the operation of government is transparent to consumers, to citizens, and that citizens actually have ways to participate in the decision-making processes in government. The campaign is committed to naming a federal government-wide chief technology officer in order to coordinate these activities to make sure that agencies are doing the best job of taking advantage of available technology, to keep the government, help make the government more open, to help involve citizens more, and to make sure that there's interoperability amongst information. Amongst federal information. There's a commitment to promoting broadband deployment, and finally, a subject that Chuck and I could go on and on forever about. The Senator has been a supporter of reforming the patent system. He has said that while the patent system has an important role in promoting innovation, it's also important that we recognize now that there are aspects of the way the patent system functions that appear to discourage innovation, appear to retard the progress of technology. We've got to work on fixing that. I think I'll stop there. Look forward to your questions. And again, what I want to stress is that this is a campaign that from the beginning has been dependent on the internet. as an organizing tool, as a tool to build it to the position that it is at now. And I believe that dare I say, almost as much as the specific positions here, I don't want to say more, but as much as the specific positions in here, I think that there's an appreciation for the internet, a recognition of the transformative value of the internet that I think will go a long way towards shaping the practical approaches that Senator Obama would take as president. So thanks very much, and we'll look forward to your questions.
Counsel for the McCain campaign. Yes, he works for the campaign full-time. Prior to coming to the McCain campaign, he worked as a counsel for Time Warner and worked on patent and intellectual property issues there. Prior to that, he was worked for several other companies as an intellectual property attorney, and then was in the Navy before that, where it ties into the Band of Brothers theme for the McCain campaign, and is also from the great city of Detroit, home of the future Stanley Cup champions.
The role to be a surrogate. I have a hard enough time curbing my tongue just when I speak. I mean, I try to be civil, but sometimes it's difficult. So I was thinking yesterday, I found out at 1:30 yesterday afternoon that I was going to be privileged to come join you. So that's fun. I was thinking yesterday about being a surrogate and what it means, and technology and innovation and the sorts of policy questions that we're asked to address here. I would say John McCain's outlook on tech policy is driven by his perspective that we should tend to the critical conditions of innovation and entrepreneurship. We should tend to it, and we should let the market work. Now, maybe talking a little bit about some terms is helpful here, and I think this is one place where Danny and I would agree, at least from some of the things that we've done together before. The notion of invention, I think, is related to creating something new. I would say actually creating something new. The notion of innovation, it involves more than that, I think. And so innovation, implies action. It has to do with making something new and putting it to use in a way that improves its availability. The second one relates to a skilled workforce. The third one relates to light regulation and open markets. And the fourth one relates to a commitment to discovery. So I'll quickly deal with those, and then also I'll talk just a little bit about privacy concerns, because that obviously matters in this context to the environment that we're talking about. So first of all, the availability of risk capital and a reward that's great enough to compensate for risk. Federal fiscal policy, federal innovation policy, ought to let innovators keep the rewards of what they do. This is what's driven innovation through history, we would submit to you. This is what's made America work. Taxing innovation or taxing the rich may be a populist rallying cry, but it's the pursuit of riches that drives entrepreneurship in our society. That's a good thing, and it's a great American strength. I would say, in Yale, this bastion of American exceptionalism, we shouldn't apologize for American exceptionalism. We Americans have historically been different. I think we are different today. I think our entrepreneurial nature and the structures that we've set up in our society have in large part contributed to that difference, although from the rest of the world, although there are other things, and that's an important thing. So the availability of risk capital and making sure that the system rewards the behaviors that we want to reward is a very important thing. The second thing is a skilled workforce. It was funny for me, sort of an eye-opening thing, being a patent lawyer who got dragged down to Washington over the last 4 years to help with the discussion of patent reform. It was funny to me to find that a bunch of my fellow patent lawyers thought that innovation equaled patents. I find that preposterous. I don't know how you could live on this earth and experience reality and think of innovation as anything other than a big amalgam of a lot of things. I mean, it's about tax policy, it's about immigration policy, it's about education policy, it's about all these different complex inputs. And that's why it's hard. But the fact that it's hard doesn't mean that we can fail. So if we can get aligned on basic goals, if we can have a civil conversation and set up a process that works to improve these things, the McCain campaign believes that America can continue to improve. A skilled workforce, as I said, is the second important condition that we need to tend to. And this relates to several things. First of all is appropriate education for the information age. We don't need to spend today, decrying the state of education, but I think we can at least recognize that education has a lot to do with what we're talking about. Not only are probably most people in the audience overeducated, I'm not saying that's bad, but we look at the trends of what's happening in this country, and I think we see some alarming trends in terms of technical education of our young people and preparation of our citizens for participation in the future. A report released earlier this year by the Computer Research Association showed the number of computer science majors in the United States dropped by about half since 2000. The number of fewer than 20% of American undergraduates are earning degrees in computer science. And these are problems that we need to address in multifaceted ways. We can't just be, there was an announcement from China recently that I read. This isn't on my campaign talking points, so. There was an announcement I read from China recently that said they figured out that for the percentage of their population, the large percentage of their population, that just wouldn't be able to hack at studying science and math, they were going to force them all to learn English because that was going to be necessary. We can't do that sort of thing in the United States. We're not going to set up a centralized education system, but we need to bring focus and resources and efforts to improving education for the new era that we're entering. Immigration reform, I think, is also an important part of tending to the workforce that we're going to need in the future. Perversely, the severe restraints in hiring foreign skilled labor often lead to jobs moving outside the United States or being outsourced. Yet there's evidence that hiring an H-1B visa holder can create up to 20 additional local jobs. The point being that we ought not to think of ourselves as Fortress America that's engaged in an autocracy in a way of trying to figure out how we can close our borders and solve these problems. We need to solve these problems in an adult 21st century way, which involves staying true to American values. We have benefited from people who want to strive, people who want to engage in entrepreneurial activity, people who want to bring their talents to our country. That's not to say that immigration isn't a hard issue. I think all the things that we're going to talk about today are difficult issues. But the fact that they're difficult doesn't mean that we shouldn't attack them. Senator McCain supports not only raising the caps on H-1B visas from its current level, but reforming the process to give the Labor Department flexibility to adjust for market conditions. As President, Senator McCain would also push hard to eliminate the backlog in UB visas that have handicapped the greater economy in the tech sector. So there's a lot of aspects to improving our workforce. That's something we need to talk about if we really care about technology policy. The third one would be light regulation, free and open markets. Hopefully it's not a surprise to anybody that a surrogate for a Republican candidate would say that. But I think it's an important value that goes back to really to the founding of the country, and it's something that we ought to care about. Regulation, I think it's important to learn from history and think about whether the model of regulating the telephone industry that's over 100 years old, whether that can really be tweaked to deal with the sort of technologies that we're talking about and to make sure that these technologies work appropriately in our society today. We would say, the McCain campaign would say no, it can't. And one indication would be when you need a Telecom Act of 750,000 words, perhaps that shows you that you're going down the wrong path. There's also, this can be called the futility principle. Basically, there is no good to be gained from trying to use old solutions that were created in old conditions to deal with new conditions. So Senator McCain is highly skeptical that radio era regulatory structures can possibly keep pace with the sorts of technologies that we're talking about here, with the sorts of problems that we need to regulate. Creativity and tracking market trends, and not a strong suit of regulators, is what we need. And we need to remember that incorrect regulation can stifle and in fact hinder innovation, which of course would be at the very least perverse. Regulatory philosophy in innovative, fast-paced markets should focus on anti-competitive behavior with strong and swift enforcement for demonstrable harm, rather than grand ex-ante regulatory regimes. When the market fails, President McCain will act, but he will not aid and abet market failure with excessive regulation. President McCain will reform Sarbanes-Oxley. We can talk about that later if you want. Free trade would be another aspect of dealing with light regulation and free and open markets. But I think the one thing that I would want to emphasize here and we're not going to have a debate. Hopefully we'll have, I don't think that Senator proposing simple market forces and antitrust alone, and I don't think Senator McCain is proposing that either. I think what's important, if you look at the Senator's record, if you look at the proposals that our campaign has made, is that of course you need market forces. That's one thing that distinguishes us from the people who we would like not to be. I mean, foreigners, not wonderful people in the Obama campaign. Of course you need real enforcement of anti-competitive regulations. But when it's appropriate, you also need new regulations if they're necessary, if there have been studies to determine that they would be helpful. And most importantly, you need vigorous enforcement of all the regulations that are in place. So we can talk more if you like, but those aspects of a light regulatory environment, allowing the markets to work appropriately, are important. Finally, the commitment to discovery. The notion is basically that there are a lot of things that can be done and should be done to bolster and increase the effect of the importance of discovery and invention and innovation in our economy. The nation spends something like 2.7% of gross domestic product on R&D, about $28 billion, give or take. But more we think can be done. Focus has been, on the National Science Foundation, Department of Energy, National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, Competes program at the Department of Education, stuff like that. But the first priority needs to be, and this gets back to the initial point, getting private capital to work, which, for example, is why Senator McCain supports making the R&D tax credit permanent. The R&D tax credit is not only an investment, it's a competitiveness issue, it's something that we should care about. The big picture idea being there are a number of tools and approaches which are available, but it needs to be an important focus of any comprehensive and I would say reasonable innovation policy, that we actually put focus on a commitment to discovery, on tending these roots, on making this sort of stuff arise, rather than just hoping. Finally, I'd like to say a little bit, and I'm sure we'll get into it some more, and the questions part sounds to me like it'll be the most fun part of what we're talking about. A little bit about privacy or personal security. I've been mostly an observer of the discussions that have been going on in that area over the last 10 years. I mean, as a parent, as an individual, I think the important thing to say there is that the McCain campaign would look at privacy sort of in a broader context. And the historical analogy that I would give you is this. The founders of our republic had a view of liberty which wasn't sort of constrained. It wasn't only freedom from. The founders would tell you that liberty is not mere licentiousness. I think similarly when you talk about policy, about privacy, you need to be thinking in broader terms in the world that we live in now and in the world that we see ourselves moving into. And I would suggest that what we're really talking about in larger terms, in an analytical framework which might help us understand, is we're really talking about personal security issues and not just privacy. So in the sense that liberty isn't just licentiousness, privacy ought not to be just my ability to hide things, but it ought to be considered in full context of what's necessary for personal security. I think we can develop that a little bit further going along, but the basic notion is that our environment, the environment in which we operate, we need personal security in the digital age. We need it in new ways and different ways than we did previously. And in a McCain campaign, in a McCain administration, there would be four sort of key points to ensuring personal security rights for individuals and for the society. The first one would be education and giving examples to consumers and to the society. And the notion is here, I think, the sort of bully pulpit notion plus technological innovation. I mean, just as the problems which face us have arisen as a result of technology, we believe that there are technological approaches which are going to be necessary to a multi-layered targeted legislation and regulation when necessary. And hopefully we can get into it, but I think Senator McCain has a wonderful record in terms of trying to find solutions and actually implementing solutions to solve problems in a careful and prudent way going forward in this area. The two important things that I would say to remember when dealing with targeted legislation to solve problems when that's necessary. First of all, it should be the sort of do no harm principle. That this shouldn't freeze us into inaction. I mean, when physicians, whether or not they're a good example, try to follow the Hippocratic Oath, it doesn't mean that surgeons, freeze up and never do surgery, for fear of there ever possibly being harm. Rather, the notion is do no foreseeable harm, but do some study first to make sure that you know what the harms might be, and to make sure that you know how things will be figured out. So, do no harm would have to be one principle if you're talking about new regulations or new legislation. And the second one would be to remember the futility principle. I mean, there are just some solutions which could be futile, and we should accept analytically that it won't be any amount of study that leads to those things making something. The fourth and a very important final thing is increased enforcement. I mean, we have no shortage in society today of laws or lawyers. I think what we have is a shortage of efficient implementation of those resources. And so smart and resilient and reliable enforcement of the rules and regulations that we have would be a fourth and very important pillar of activity in the area that we're talking about. So hopefully that's a good introduction. I'm really looking forward to questions, but thank you very much for your attention.
And just this week, the OECD released a report saying, yet again, the U.S. is not doing well. We're in 15th place when it comes to high-speed internet access penetration. The report goes on to suggest increased government involvement in making possible high-speed internet access penetration, and also suggests that open access is the way to go to engender the kind of competition the market needs, so that you have a sidewalk on which all the things that you're talking about, Chuck, like increased innovation, access to new jobs for people living in remote areas, can be made possible. So my concrete question for both of you to discuss is, what do you see as the role of government in ensuring that this basic communications infrastructure is available to us in this increasingly competitive world?
I can start. Good question. That's why it's always nice to have a professor on the panel, right? There's probably two or three things. The first one is, I think, there really needs to be a vision. I mean, we need a vision that's forcefully embraced by the president that challenges the country and all the aspects of our society to move forward boldly in this area. I think right now we have unduly low expectations of our infrastructure needs and of what we can achieve, in part because of the sort of broken way this debate has been conducted for quite a while. Part of the problem stems from seeing broadband as a utilities problem, I think. Just sort of a getting pipes in the ground problem. We need to broaden the focus to understand the importance of data-intensive applications. We need to see technology and networks as vital components, as vital tools that we can use for addressing all of our societal and economic environmental needs. I was watching one of the news shows this morning before I came over, and the CEO of Intuit was on talking to one of those talking heads. He said, I didn't know it, but that this was the first year that income tax filing in the United States, the number online had exceeded the number that were filed in traditional means. That's probably a good thing. That's something that shouldn't surprise us, and I think that's something that we should have been pushing harder to achieve those sorts of improvements. Hopefully that's responsive.
I think that it's useful to, I think that there is a question about whether we're ahead or behind on broadband, and frankly, whether that matters. I actually think we're doing pretty well in the integration of the internet and the web in our society. That kind of factoid that Chuck mentioned, that we're filing taxes more online and off, is an illustration of that. I think that I will say that I am personally relatively skeptical about making a whole lot of regulatory progress on the steps that are needed to promote the kind of competition that you're talking about, Susan. We went through this with the Telecommunications Act. It took about 5 years to pass that act. Senator McCain did not vote for that act because he was angry with the broadcasters about a number of things. But that was an act that was very much in favor of basic facilities-based competition. What happened after that act was passed, as many of you know, is that a number of the telecommunications companies went to court and challenged the implementation and got it so tangled up that there, in fact, isn't very much useful in that act. So to some extent, it became a kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Those who didn't like the regulation, I think, successfully proved that it was very hard to regulate. So I want to distinguish that set of questions, which I wouldn't give up on, but I think are complex, from the basic questions about how we regulate and protect the openness of the internet that we have today. I myself believe that openness is more important than bandwidth. I'd rather have a more open internet at lower speeds than a faster set of internet connections that have all sorts of discriminatory features about them. I think that has been the history of the internet, that we have grown its capacity through openness. We have not created openness by adding capacity. We've in fact lived with incredibly narrow little pipes and done extraordinary things with them. And so I think the critical job right now is to be very clear about the importance of the openness of the internet. What Senator McCain has said in the past, he doesn't have a lot written on this, but you can go and look at his talks to Google and places like that. And what he said very clearly is that he believes that market forces will keep the internet open, and if necessary, there's antitrust law in the background. I think that that's not enough, and I think we have to be clear right now that that's not enough. I don't think we should confuse the question of whether we might risk over-regulating in general. I don't think we should confuse the question of net neutrality with the idea of applying old-style rate of return telecommunications regulation to the internet. I don't think anyone here would support that. I don't think the McCain campaign supports that. We certainly don't support that. My guess is not many people in this room would want to have the entire internet regulated by the Federal Communications Commission and state public utility commissions. I don't think anyone is talking about that when they're talking about net neutrality. But I think what we are talking about is a basic expectation of non-discriminatory provision of access to the internet. And I think if we fail to do that, what we will have done is squandered an extraordinary piece of innovation. I think all of you know well that the internet that we have today, both in the United States and around the world, exists because of a very complex and probably partly accidental combination of funding for research, the very regulatory environment that Chuck was concerned about, the regulatory environment that kept basic telecommunication services open such that we could build the internet on top of it. We wouldn't have the internet today if we didn't have the Title II regulations of telecommunications common carriers. And so we have to, I think we're at a point, an oddly conservative point, frankly, where it's very important to make sure that we don't mess up what we have. I think there is some risk that could happen. I agree with Chuck that the net neutrality debate got started in a very odd way, and it's probably the wrong term for the whole discussion to begin with. But I think it's important to have a president who is going to recognize the value of openness and be committed to defending it.
Well, while we're in the discussion of telecom carriers going to court, let me move the discussion to the NSA wiretapping case. And in particular, there's the possibility that this issue could be moved to the next Congress and the next president, punted for another year down the road. If it does come up, what would the McCain or Obama
Hypothetical, that's one of the wonderful things about doing this. I think we can answer at the level, I can at least answer at the level of broad principles if I'm talking for the campaign. I think that, first of all, whatever gets done in terms of regulating those things, needs to be a more
NSLs, much less challenge them in court. So Senator Obama has supported all along making sure that when government surveillance techniques are used for national security purposes or other purposes, that there's real meaningful oversight and that there are real checks and balances. And that will certainly continue in Obama administration. Senator Obama has voted against, several times, has voted against extension of immunity, both retrospectively and prospectively, to telecommunications companies. I would note that Senator McCain, when he had the chance to vote against immunity provisions in various of the Senate bills, did not vote against them, so he's implicitly at least supported immunity, looking backward at least, the retrospective immunity for telecommunications companies. Those were complicated pieces of legislation, and there were compromise efforts that were going on. So I wouldn't want to. I'd leave it to Chuck to characterize that. But the fact is, there is a voting record on these issues. Going forward, what is documented in the campaign's technology white paper is a very clear statement that a recognition on the one hand that advanced surveillance and data mining techniques can be important tools for protecting national security interests, and Senator Obama recognizes that and wants those tools to be available. He wants them to be used appropriately and to be used with appropriate oversight. In particular, along the lines of looking at privacy protections as questions of usage limitation, he has said very clearly that what we have to guard against is what many in this community have called mission creep in national security activities. It's one thing to deploy advanced surveillance and advanced analytic techniques to protect national security. It's quite another thing to turn those techniques on U.S. citizens for the purpose of U.S. law enforcement. We don't have adequate mechanisms, either legal or technical, in place to preserve that line. And we could talk a lot about this view of privacy, which I find quite interesting, the view of privacy as personal security. That is clearly an aspect of what privacy is about. I guess I'll say just personally, and I don't want to say this on behalf of the campaign exactly, my view is that in particular, when we're talking about the privacy of U.S. citizens, either against our government or as against large commercial organizations, I think we have to think fundamentally about privacy as a way of regulating the relationship that we have with these large organizations, and in particular as a way of limiting the power that we accord to governments or to commercial organizations. I would say that I think that is a fundamental principle that is necessary to protect liberty. It's often a principle that, to be very clear, that we need. This is not, I think, principally a question of education. It's not even principally a question of technical innovation. I think it's principally a question of having a very clear policy view about just how powerful we're prepared to have our government be and just how powerful we're prepared to have large organizations be. And that's got to be where we start this discussion. I kind of doubt it. I mean, I think that we certainly saw in the Clinton administration the experience of having a high-level person who was in charge of coordinating interagency efforts on copy. It was a mistake, interestingly enough, in promoting the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. I think that these questions, particularly as to copyright and kind of trade in commercial copyrighted material, are questions of balance. The Obama campaign has not stated a position on the DMCA in particular. I think that there's enough of a recognition in general that there are aspects of the current copyright regime that are working neither for citizens nor even for the commercial enterprises on whose behalf they were supposedly passed. And I guess my view is that we kind of got out ahead of, in making law, particularly in the DMCA, we got out ahead on marketing copyrighted material was going to work.
All you to help get the word out to make sure that people